Everyone has heard those dreaded words. It gets better, I swear. It gets good after 6-9 quintillion episodes, I swear. And one anime that just so happens to fall into that category we'll be talking about today, and that's Gintama. You know, that anime that takes up like 20% of the top 50 anime on my anime list, and is fawned over by many anime YouTubers. Except apparently, it's not really one of those wait until it gets good anime, as the time people say it takes is usually less than we'll say One Piece, Bleach, Naruto, and the like. They usually just say you gotta wait until either past the first two filler episodes or up until the first major arc, that being the Benizakura arc. All of this for an anime whose name is wordplay for silver balls. Naturally, it's a comedy anime focusing largely on parody of the shonen genre, amongst other things. However, it does contain larger arcs that features action scenes, as this anime is also known for being able to have you cry tears of laughter one moment to tears of sadness, to the next moment having you jump out of your seat. Hearing this from other people sparked my curiosity, and so I had to take a look at it, and I watched a bit of it, that being over 200 episodes. So after all that, let me set a few things straight. People often blame the series' slow start both on people getting into it for the wrong reasons, they just want to watch action in Gintama, and also for the filler two-parter that the anime starts with. Now, the anime does start off painfully bad, as many people say. However, what's understated is how long it takes. It doesn't take until after the first two episodes, nor until the Benizakura arc, which by the way is over 50 episodes deep into the show. No, the show doesn't get to consistently watchable till over 80 fucking episodes into the show. Now you might say, well, that's not too bad for anime. Let me emphasize the word watchable. Not amazing, not great, not good, no, not even fine. Watchable. Akin to me saying bearable. Now, to be fair to the show, it does for the most part have an upward trend in quality, and today I will be showing you guys this trend. What sucks about the show, what parts are good, and whether or not you should even bother getting into it. If you have watched the show already and just want to hear my beloved opinion, great. You get to listen to someone's honest opinion on it, with minimal to no spoilers. Just a quick note, due to the large number of episodes and the varying quality between certain areas of the show, I will split this up into sections, starting with disappointment in the game of life. The first two episodes are as atrocious as many people say they are, and while it gets better, it's like going from shit to mud. You want nothing to do with it and are mad you got involved. This is due to the humor not making any sense, the emotional moments falling flat at nearly every turn, the world building not being that immersive, and none of the characters are particularly likable or interesting to begin with. There doesn't seem to be a consistent line of logic with them either. One example is an episode where Kagura, an alien girl who's part of the main trio, and whose race are basically a bunch of Saiyans from Dragon Ball Z called the Yato clan or whatever, vows to be less violent, only for her to then hit Shinpachi, another character who is part of the main trio. And this is made worse by there being scenes and arcs later on that are predicated on her attempting to be non-violent, or at least less violent than she actually is, yet we never get to see her actually do this. Which is how you get moments that are supposed to be emotional but end up missing the mark, and characters that you aren't able to get invested to. This also bleeds into the humor, as a lot of times it's just, oh, Kagura beats up Shinpachi, look how rambunctious they are. Rinse and repeat. Now you could argue that's because they're close, however, Kagura is incredibly violent with just about everyone. And regarding the rinse and repeat line I said earlier, it doesn't just apply to the overly repetitive humor between Kagura and Shinpachi, as the show is seemingly afraid that you'll forget which character is which, and so it'll just play the same character-specific jokes every time that person enters a scene. One obvious example is Kondo, the chief of the Shinsengumi. The Shinsengumi acting as a pseudo-police force in this setting. Now, the joke specific to him is that he is like a gorilla, and so every time he enters a scene, you'll have someone call him a gorilla, and he'll act confused. Rinse and repeat. Another example is Gintoki, the protagonist, and his addiction to sweets, and how every time he goes someplace with food, he'll order something sweet, and then every time a character will comment on this. Rinse and repeat. Toshiro, the vice chief of the Shinsengumi, has an obsession with mayo, and so every time he's in a scene, he'll eat or use mayo in an abnormal fashion, and then someone will comment on it. Rinse and repeat. You get the point. These aren't the only problems I have with the humor. As I said, it just doesn't make sense, at least to me, as a lot of the humor needs to be explained with additional text, which takes away from the scene, and oftentimes even with additional explanation, the humor still doesn't make sense. Now, there are minor moments of levity here and there, some examples being when Elizabeth, this weird penguin thing, is introduced. Elizabeth is just a weird character, as they, whatever it is, tends to be a bit inconsistent. But at least here it's clear it's intentional instead of it feeling like an oversight. One example is how Elizabeth is at times a director or producer of the anime. Other times she, or whatever they are, is they have a second family. Like crazy stuff like that. And Elizabeth is just a character where the show can get away with inconsistencies, as it's built into the charm and humor of the character, as a lot of the jokes are just people seeing Elizabeth for the first time and questioning what they even are. If you somehow can't tell by this overly long section on this creature, Elizabeth is one of my favorite characters in the show. And the Mr. Raindrop outro that heavily features them is also really, really good. Now, originally I was going to point out that not all the episodes in the first 25 are bad, some are just mid, and use that as a point of optimism, but that was just too sad to do, especially since they're on the, let's just say the lower end of mid. And it's also certainly possible the quote-unquote mid episodes only felt that way in comparison to the absolute trash surrounding them, a la the ugly friend effect. When you're, friends with an ugly person just so that you look better by comparison. Absolutely messed up stuff. Anyways, besides, there are nonetheless still two really, really, really good episodes in this bunch. Well, one really, really, really good episode and one slightly overrated episode, but nonetheless, still very good. In the blue corner, you have episode 18, the underappreciated diamond in the rough. And in the red corner, you have the respected and loved champion, episode 25, the top dog. Let's start with the champion, episode 25, commonly referred to as the hot pot episode. Now, when people talk about how it doesn't take long for Gintama to get good, they often point to this episode. They will also showcase this episode as to the style of humor the show will trend towards over time, using this episode as a nice litmus test as to whether you'll like the show or not. And I have to say, this episode was very good. For those of you who don't know the episode, it's about the members of the main cast sharing a hot pot, and each person is trying to get all the meat for themselves. Hilarity ensues as they play Death Note-esque mind games on each other. It's mighty funny, but boy does it take a while for the rest of the show to catch up to it, and I wish people who shout out this episode were more transparent that even after this episode, you have to wait quite a while for the show to get into the same realm of humor and quality. Furthermore, while I do think this episode definitely contains early elements of what the show's humor would evolve into, I don't think it's the best example, as the show later on would rely more so on absurdist metaphorical skits coupled with meta commentary and dynamic character interactions for its humor rather than just mind games. If that didn't make any sense, basically something will happen, someone will give a hypothetical scenario to explain what just happened, and that scenario is really weird and goofy. And then the meta commentary part is basically just the characters breaking the fourth wall and commenting on what's happening to the audience. But anyways, I'm honestly even a bit annoyed, as some people will often use this episode to refute people's complaints about the bad start and to defend early Gintama and say that it's not all that bad. And I like the episode, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that it's anywhere good enough to carry the weight of all of these bad to at best mediocre episodes outside of the two exceptions that we're speaking of right now. Example or episode to reference, if you want to find out what the show's humor would be later on, is actually episode 93. And now for the blue corner, episode 17. Hot take for all the Gintama fans. This is the best episode out of not only this section, but one of the best episodes of the first 200 episodes in the show. Now, if you disagree, that's fair, but regardless, I think this episode is also a good litmus test for the rest of the show. Where the other episode is decently good at showing the show's future humor, this episode shows the anime's potential capacity of having emotional and heartfelt moments. And something I feel that isn't brought enough in Gintama discussions are the flashbacks. Oftentimes in anime, flashbacks, they quite frankly just suck balls. They're long, boring, and are typically crybait that gets in the way of the main story and feels totally unnecessary. One example of that being in Black Clover. Now, this critique, for the most part, does not apply to Gintama. Again, for the most part, obviously not every single one is a home run, but they're usually surprisingly good and either set up the later emotional beats quite well, or will come in bits and pieces, with it occasionally popping back and forth, eventually leading to a moment that recontextualizes everything that you're watching. Episode 17, which from now on I'll just be referring to as the Toymaker episode for reasons that will make sense later on, falls into the first camp, with it setting up a mechanic who watched his son get executed by the Shogun, and now after being enabled attempts to kill the Shogun, with the main cast's role obviously being to stop him. Now there is other stuff going on, like the show trying to set up a long-term villain who's the guy who enabled the mechanic, and the villain's connection to Gintoki, the protagonist, but I'm not going to talk about it anymore right now, because A, that stuff's fine in this episode, and B, the highlight of this episode is when the mechanic is successfully stopped by Gintoki, when the old man is forced to confront the final words his son told him, and has to figure out how he'll answer the big question: what will he do now? Now it does end on a positive note, with the last we see of him in this episode, he's making toys for children, but this is an episode that stayed with me for days, and then weeks, and then months, and then now. And this episode is a huge reason as to why I'm making this video. And kind of how you go into a two-parter with mixed expectations due to prior episodes, only to then thankfully see something good when you get to see what looks like a wholesome story of a dying dog trying to get back to his aging owner. Which leads us to... with it mostly starting off strong, with my favorite episodes being the Mochike episodes and one of the episodes featuring Katsuda. And on my initial watch, it seemed like maybe people would be right, as while there were still plenty of mediocre and just straight bad episodes, there was also an uptick in good to borderline great episodes. This, coupled with how much people hyped up the Benizakura arc, I was super excited to see the first major serious arc. Well, that's a bit of an over-exaggeration. It'd be more accurate to say cautious optimism, as while the episodes have gotten better, there were still stinkers, and even the better ones often needed Elizabeth to carry in the humor department. But hey, I've seen a small minority of people have this arc as their favorite. So what did I think of it? I'll be real with you. This arc is so mid. They introduce a cast of characters I have no interest in, and the plot being contingent on these guys making a really strong sword that can cut through the giant boats in the air isn't that interesting when they already have guns and explosives that can do that sort of thing. Also, the internal struggle between someone who makes weapons but lives during a time of peace isn't conveyed in a way that I was interested in, even though it is an interesting premise in and of itself. The whole arc felt like a worse version of the Toymaker episode, dressed in the clothing of a generic shonen anime. But hey, Kagura's fight scene was cool, and the following episodes were mostly fine or even enjoyable at some points, and it really seemed as if the show was going to continue on with its overall positive trend. This is like when the wholesome dog owner two-parter you're starting to get invested into suddenly has the dog be able to backflip, stand on two legs, and start speaking, and you're left there, sitting there thoroughly disappointed. Thankfully, the two-parter then ropes you back in with promises that it'll get better, let it cook now, and you cautiously decide to wait it out. And then it does get better. The episodes, while not amazing, are overall notably better than where the show started, and you, well, start to think maybe it's not the Benizakura arc where things get better, but the episodes after it, and the show is getting good now. The dog and his owner story will be a nice, wholesome one. And then right when you think the story between the dog and his owner is getting good and you're enjoying what it's offering, the fucking cats show up and ruin the moment, because you are not allowed to enjoy this. What is good is only there to be taken away to increase your suffering. Now, wallow in your misery. Nowhere is this more encapsulated than with the start of the Fuyo arc, with it starting with a funny horror commercial, only for them to then spin the concept of said commercial into the plot for the episode and then stretch it out for a whole arc. And while I could say the following episodes are better, that would be like saying that it was nice that we went from being eaten ass up by baboon to having a goat lick the skin off my feet. But at least the arc following this was good, with it having a better premise, fighting that seemed to have some serious potential later on in the anime, and a funny B-plot with Gondo potentially marrying into a family of giant alien gorillas. And while the show has certainly taken a step back in its standalone episodes, it's not as if we'll get back to the horrors of the first episode, right? Right? The hard-boiled egg arc. This arc, just like the Tama arc, starts off pretty strong, with an opening that would be quite good on its own, only for it to then be stretched out to not only a full episode, but for 2 episodes. Those 2 episodes being far worse than anything the Tama arc put out, as they are probably the worst in the entire show, as the plot is boring and the humor is largely just the same joke being played over and over again. A problem that initially seemed that the show was trying to move away from. It was so bad, I damn near gave up on the show, deciding that it wasn't worth it and to just hand in the towel, call it quits, to never come back to Gintama again. But, or rather, and the cherry on top of all this, the thing that really makes my blood boil is the 2-parter directly after it. Not because it's bad, but because what comes after this is genuinely one of the best episodes in the whole show. And there are people out there who probably dropped the show because of the hard-boiled egg 2-parter and just barely missed out on the following 2 episodes. That being the Okida Mitsuba 2-parter. Which leads us to... These episodes have some of the best emotional scenes in the entire first season of the show, and it's the anime finally delivering on the promises that not only its fans made, but that the Toy Maker and even the Hot Pot episodes made. It's like when the weird dog alien you've been following finally meets up with its owner again, and you find out that the reason the owner tries so hard to live on and make sure other people die before him is because he doesn't want anyone to deal with the grief of his passing on. And the episodes following this 2-parter are generally pretty good. Don't get me wrong, there are a few stinkers here and there and plenty of mediocre ones, but even the episodes that aren't that good still have a lot going for them. And there's only a few missteps that degrade the episodes as opposed to the entire thing being a dumpster fire like in the previous sections. Overall, a definitive congratulations to the show for the massive overall improvement. One reason for the jump in quality is because the anime isn't as overly reliant on Elizabeth for its humor, and instead being able to balance the use of Elizabeth with the other tools in its repertoire when it comes to making you laugh. This in large part due to the jokes just making more sense than they did in the past, and when they don't quite make sense, that's merely the show leaning into its absurdist type of humor. The anime's emotional storytelling is generally tighter than it was before, allowing it to tell a short story that's interesting throughout. It can then hit you with an emotional gut punch by its conclusion. One obvious example is the episode with Kagura's umbrella in the rain. Those of you who know what I mean. Though flawed, this section nevertheless gave me hope for the rest of the show. Speaking of which... Now the episodes here were actually good to great even, at least at the start. I loved the episode where Kagura couldn't fall asleep and bothered Gintoki, and the Barber 2-parter with the Shogun showing up was really good. However, the show once again then fell into the problem of stretching up a joke or premise on for too long. Just like if the cat alien gets pushed on screen and stays there for what feels like an eternity, causing the show to deviate from its comedic strengths, such as their absurdist humor or use of Elizabeth, leading to large stretches of this section being boring and stale. And it would be one thing if this was the standalone episodes or even the non-serious arcs, which, by the way, the problem wasn't really the standalone episodes, but rather the overly non-serious arcs. But unfortunately, even the serious arcs didn't really deliver. I'm trying not to be overly critical despite the channel name, but they were very disappointing. And some of you may have noticed that outside of the Benizakura arc, I've largely avoided talking about them, which leads us to the penultimate section of the video. Now, the Shinsengumi arc started off decently well, with its politicking and the Toshi stuff having some of the funniest scenes of the whole show. The general more serious tone in this arc was also very refreshing, and I enjoyed a fair amount of the fights during the midsection of the arc, especially the stuff with Sogo. But I only ended up becoming rather disappointed due to it very quickly falling apart towards the end. I feel that Toshiro does too good of a job fighting back the thing controlling his body, as there are just so many instances of him just coming back and speaking normally, whether it be him being the butt of a joke or even for moments that are supposed to be serious. And there are too many instances of characters being shot at yet facing no repercussions for this. I mean, there's a scene where the main trio are, for some reason, stuck on a bridge completely wide open, and they're being shot at by a guy on a helicopter, which would be bad enough if it was a sniper rifle or something, but it's not. It's a machine gun, and the bullets perfectly go around them, which isn't even the only time this happens, by the way. But the worst part about this arc, and the serious arcs in general, is that the mangaka always feels the need to give the antagonist of the arc a sympathetic conclusion. It isn't as bad in this arc as you could argue that the Shinsengumi cared about this guy, but we rarely get to see that as it's confined to this arc, so it just feels out of nowhere and ham-fisted. And it's even worse in the next arc when it's someone whose backstory is him beating a young girl because he thinks she's annoying, and it plays ham-fisted sad music. Not for her, but for him. And the girl displays what is obviously Stockholm Syndrome, but it's played off as a bittersweet, wholesome moment. And then this guy gets a grave in the sun just how he wanted, which is frustrating because this arc started off stronger than the previous one. Seeing the Yato clan be the antagonist here brought some serious stakes and tension here, and the world building and expansion of the lore was really interesting. But the value of it was highly diluted by the end. And so it makes it really hard for me to think that this is the best arc in the show, as at least the Shinsengumi ending you could argue isn't that bad, but that bar is considerably lower than what was initially promised by fans of the show, especially considering the fact that even if you take out the arcs, the actual standalone episodes themselves take far longer than what was promised for it to get good. And even when it does, it doesn't consistently hit that high bar that we were talking about earlier. And so when we do get to the arcs, that, to be fair, is where a lot of the hype does come from, I find it hard not to blame people for being disappointed. Especially when I knew that the arcs weren't the sole reason for watching the show, or even really the main reason until maybe like towards the end. I came in ready to enjoy the humor and the standalone episodes, but I didn't get that, at least not until it was honestly too late, really. And even when these episodes really did start to get consistently better and I was enjoying each episode, the show just fell back into the problems that I mentioned earlier. But I knew that there was still at least one more major arc before I got to the end of the show. And with the dozens of episodes left, I thought that this was just a bump in the road. But then the same problem happens again in this final major arc, but somehow it's even worse. The Red Spider arc is the worst major serious arc of the anime so far. And yet again, it started off really strong too. Having the villain show multiple speed feats early on really helped separate him from the previous ones. But then it's ruined by his weird, awkward character writing. And you could play this off as him being insane, except it's not even written with any kind of through line. And the ninja guy showing up just to give exposition on the antagonist so they can smash in an entire flashback just to give this guy a sympathetic ending was so ham-fisted. And I know I'm saying that a lot, but unfortunately, that's just what this is. Ham-fisted. And honestly repetitive, just constantly doing this. This isn't to say all parts of this section were like this, as there were still a few standout, standalone episodes, and the occasional 2 or 3-parter were mostly fine to occasionally good. However, there was just an abundance of mid or even bad episodes. Despite this section is still far better than the first, even if it does fall a bit short of the second, as it has some of the best episodes in the entire show. One obvious example is episode 188, where Hasagawa, the Badao dude, is observed by a kid. Genuinely one of the funniest anime episodes I've ever seen, and really just one of the funniest media I've ever seen. And clearly in the top 10 episodes of Gintama, you could honestly argue that it's the best episode in the show so far, and this season of the show still ends strong with the funny 2-parter with Kagura's dad and Gintoki attempting to do something nice for her, giving the season a nice wholesome ending. However, despite this, I cannot recommend this show to someone else. It takes too long to get anywhere, and even when it does eventually start to reach something respectable, it still falls short of what's needed to make it remotely worth it, leading to what is only a disappointing drawn-out conclusion for a disappointing drawn-out anime. Except it's not. See, it took me over a year and a half to watch the first season of Gintama due to how much of a slog it was to view it. Yet, even so, I still found moments where I would be thinking fondly of the show. Whether it be Kagura singing the Ole Ole song, or her general improvement as a character, which by the way is extremely dramatic. The funny Reddit scenes we get of Shinpachi, the increasingly creative uses of Kondo's gorilla joke, the general trend towards absurdism, Elizabeth, the occasional cool moments from Gintoki and Toshiro, and of course the stellar emotional moments that make you forget that the title of this show is wordplay for silver balls. Like the moment from the two-parter of the dog and his owner, when the dog and the owner are desperately trying to outlive one another so that their faithful companion don't have to grieve their death. Only for both of them to think that they were the last ones to die, their deaths mere moments apart. So while yes, I can't recommend this show to someone else, I will still keep watching and documenting it to find out if Gintama's ending is as good as people say. Alright, so sorry about the birds, guys. It's kind of hard to, record with them in the room, but here's what they look like. Yeah, they're really cute. They're a bit of a, they're lovebirds. They like kissing each other. But yeah, also sorry about the admittedly poor mic quality or audio quality in general throughout the video, as when I recorded basically the entire of it, I didn't have the mic that I currently have, so sorry about that. And since I'm trying to get the Invincible video out before season 4 comes out, it would just take too long to re-record the whole video with the mic that I currently have. Also, I don't want to do that, I'm gonna be honest. Like, it took me so long to make this video. Oh, I spent like about a month on it. Actually, I spent longer than a month now that I think about it, if I include the, outlining and note-taking process. Not the watching process, like the note-taking process, but anyways. Yeah, so sorry again. Hopefully the audio isn't too bad, I guess. Thanks for making it this far, if anyone did. Hello. Yeah, this part isn't scripted at all. So hi. Thanks. Okay, I already said that. Whatever. So please give me feedback, like and subscribe, comment, blah 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 blah. But yeah, trying to make my stuff better. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully it goes well. But yeah, if you like this video, check out my other stuff and maybe stick around for my next video, since I do hope that one will be my best one so far, at least in terms of, overall quality and, the mission statement that I'm going for in regards to it. Since it's the reason I made this channel, or not the reason, a pretty big reason. But whatever. Yeah. So it'd be very much appreciated. Okay, you guys don't care anymore. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.